People say time heals all wounds, but they forget that some wounds come from the people living right next door. And when someone hurts your child, especially a child who already fights harder than the world ever will, that wound stays forever. Before I tell you what this HOA Karen did to my son, stay with me till the end, because what happened next will remind you that justice may take time, but it never forgets the people who deserve it. I never believed that neighbors could be cruel, especially in a quiet community where most residents were older, gentle, and soft-spoken. But everything changed the day my son stepped outside with his small walker, smiling the way only innocent children smile. My son was born with a disability, but that never stopped him from finding joy in simple things, like watching birds or feeling the morning sun on his face. He moved slowly, but every step he took was a victory, a moment of courage, and a reminder that strength has nothing to do with speed. We respected everyone in that neighborhood, kept our lawn clean, paid every HOA fee on time, and never caused a single problem. But still, one woman decided my son's existence was an inconvenience to her perfect world. Her name was Karen, and she was the head of the HOA. Her voice was sharp, her eyes always judging, and her heart, if she had one, never showed a sign of kindness. It began with small comments, each one like a needle meant to poke, not pierce. She would look at my son and say things like, "Why is he so slow?" Or, "Maybe he should stay inside. This is a quiet neighborhood." At first I ignored it, thinking she was simply rude. But soon her words turned colder, sharper, and filled with the cruelty I never expected from a grown woman, especially someone who claimed to protect the rules of the community. She mocked the way he walked. She mocked the sound of his walker. She even mocked the time he took to climb the small curb near our garden. And one morning, in front of several neighbors, she laughed loudly and said, "This isn't a therapy center. Keep your kid off the sidewalks if he can't walk right." My heart stopped. Even the birds seemed silent. I felt a deep pain in my chest, the kind only a parent can understand. My son lowered his head, confused, hurt, and unsure why someone would laugh at him for simply existing. I wanted to speak, to shout, to defend him, but my voice trembled, not with fear, but with anger I had never felt before. The people around us, most of them elderly, looked away, not because they agreed with her, but because age had taught them to avoid conflict. I understood that, but silence has a strange power. It can make the cruel seem stronger and the innocent seem smaller. That day, I held my son's hand and walked him home. His little voice whispered, "Dad, am I doing something wrong?" That question broke me in a way no tragedy ever had. I knelt beside him, hugged him tight, and promised him that he had done nothing wrong, and that people who laugh at others are the ones truly broken inside. But deep in my heart, a fire had started, a fire that would soon burn through every lie Karen had built around herself. The very next week, we received a notice from the HOA, a cold letter printed with bold letters claiming that my son's walker was creating unnecessary noise and was disrupting community peace. My hand shook as I read it. I knew exactly who wrote it. Karen. She had signed it with her perfect little signature at the bottom, as if she had written something noble and respectable. But it wasn't noble. It was an attack on a child who had never hurt anyone, an attack on a family who only wanted peace, and an attack on decency itself. That letter was the spark that turned frustration into determination. I calmly walked over to her house that evening. Her yard was perfect, too perfect. Every flower trimmed, every stone placed, like she wanted everyone to know she controlled everything. And when she opened the door, she didn't even pretend to be polite. She crossed her arms and smirked, like she had already won.
She said, if your son can't walk without disturbing people, maybe he shouldn't walk outside. My breath froze. I stared at her, searching for a trace of humanity, but found none. Her smile grew wider, confident, proud, heartless. And in that moment, I realized something. People like her don't stop because you ask them to. They stop because life forces them to. I walked away without replying, not because I was weak, but because I had a better plan, a smarter plan, a plan she would never see coming. I knew she had broken rules before. I knew she had manipulated homeowners. I knew she had misused your power. And I also knew that when people like her believe they are untouchable, they usually slip. For the next few weeks, I started documenting everything. Every rude comment, every threat, every letter, every witness who had seen her mock my son. Quietly, patiently, I collected every piece of truth. Meanwhile, she kept getting bolder, louder, and more arrogant. She thought she was pushing us out, but she didn't know she was burying herself deeper with every cruel word she spoke. My son kept trying to smile through it all. That's the thing about children. They still see hope even when adults lose it. One night as he held my hand, he said, "Dad, I like walking with you." I hugged him tightly, feeling my eyes burn. His innocence gave me strength, and that strength became the reason I refused to stay silent any longer. By the end of the month, I was ready to show her that a parent's love is stronger than any HOA rule, ready to prove that kindness always wins over cruelty. And that was the beginning of the end for Karen.
I wish I could tell you that Karen stopped after that first month. I wish I could tell you that she realized her mistake, apologized, or even showed a small sign of shame. But people like her, they don't stop until life stops them. And in her mind, she was the queen of the community, the ruler of every sidewalk, every mailbox, every blade of grass. She believed she could control everything and everyone. But she was about to learn that when a parent stands up, even the strongest walls crumble. After gathering every letter she sent, every insult she threw, and every witness who quietly whispered the truth, I decided to take one more step. I reached out to the homeowners, old men, elderly women, retired teachers, and grandparents who had lived in the neighborhood long before Karen came with her fake kindness and hidden cruelty. Many of them had watched what happened to my son, and though they stayed silent at the time, their hearts were not silent. One old man named Mr. Collins, who walked with a cane and lived 3 houses away, invited me in for tea. His voice was slow and tired, but his eyes were sharp. He said, "Son, we've all seen what she's been doing. You're not alone. She's been bullying people here for years, but nobody knew how to fight back. Until now." Those words felt like someone had placed a warm hand on my shoulder. For the first time, I didn't feel alone. I felt supported. I felt like our small family finally had a community behind us. Mr. Collins handed me a folder, a thick, dusty folder that looked like it had been hidden away for years. Inside it were old complaints, ignored letters, warnings she never delivered, and documents proving that she had been using HOA funds for personal landscaping. My heart raced. This wasn't just about my son anymore. This was about every person she had mistreated. Over the next few days, more neighbors quietly came forward. A widow named Mrs. Thompson told me how Karen once shamed her for having a cracked flower pot after her husband passed away. A retired nurse explained how Karen fined her for having a slow-moving guest, even though her guest was her disabled brother. Story after story flooded in, all of them painful, all of them real, all of them proof that Karen's cruelty wasn't new. She had been hurting people quietly for years. And now, for the first time, someone was gathering the courage to stand up. I spent long nights sitting at the kitchen table, sorting papers, highlighting dates, arranging events. My son sat beside me, drawing pictures with crowns. Every now and then, he would look at me and ask, "Dad, are you working for me?" I would smile softly and say, "Yes, buddy, I'm working for you." And in those moments, his little presence reminded me why I couldn't stop, why I couldn't give up, why I had to keep fighting. A parent's love doesn't come with breaks. It doesn't get tired. It doesn't quit. After gathering everything, I prepared a formal complaint to the HOA board, something no one had dared to do before. But before I submitted it, I decided to talk to Karen one last time. Not to argue, not to fight, but to give her a chance to end things with dignity. It was early morning, and the air was cold. She was in her yard, watering her perfectly aligned flowers, humming like she had no worries in the world. I walked up slowly and said, "Karen, I have everything I need to take this to the HOA board and beyond. All I want is for you to apologize to my son and stop targeting us." She turned around with that same cruel smile, the smile that could ruin a peaceful morning. She said, "Your son is a distraction, and you're weak. You can't do anything." Her voice was filled with the same arrogance that had poisoned the neighborhood for so long. She didn't apologize. She didn't show regret. Instead, she laughed, a cold, heartless laugh that made the hair on my neck rise. At that moment, something inside me shifted. I realized she didn't deserve mercy. She didn't deserve patience. She deserved consequences. I walked away without saying another word. My silence wasn't fear. It was the calm before the storm. And that storm was only beginning to build. That evening, I submitted everything to the HOA board. Every file, every letter, every witness statement. When they saw the stack of evidence, their eyes widened. Some looked ashamed, others shocked, and a few even angry. Not at me, but at her, because they finally saw how long she had manipulated them. They scheduled a special meeting and called every homeowner to attend. People showed up in wheelchairs, leaning on canes, holding each other's arms. Some had tears in their eyes because they had waited years for this day. When Karen walked into the room, she still wore her proud smirk, as if she owned every chair, every wall, every person sitting there. But the room was different now. The silence wasn't fear anymore. It was justice waiting to be spoken. The board asked me to speak first. I stood up slowly, holding the stack of documents. My hands were steady, my voice calm. I told them everything she had done to my son. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I didn't break. I simply spoke the truth, and the truth carried more weight than any anger ever could. When I finished, the room was silent. Not a sad silence, not a nervous silence. It was the silence that comes right before a verdict. And then Mr. Collins stood up with his cane and said, "This man is telling the truth, and we have all been victims of her abuse." One by one, people stood up, some old, some fragile, some trembling, but all of them brave, and each one spoke about what she had done to them. Each story was like a stone being added to the weight she could no longer escape. Karen's smirk slowly faded. Her face turned red. Her breathing became heavy. For the first time, she looked afraid, truly afraid, because she finally realized that the people she thought were weak were stronger together than she ever had imagined. By the end of the meeting, the board announced their decision. They were launching a full investigation into her actions. They were freezing her authority, and they were going to review every financial decision she had ever made while in power. Karen stormed out of the room, slamming the door so hard that the windows rattled. But the rattling wasn't fear. It was the sound of her walls cracking. As I walked out with my son holding my hand, several neighbors patted my shoulder. Some thanked me, some wiped tears, and some simply nodded, knowing that a change had finally begun. And for the first time since moving into that neighborhood, I felt something I never expected to feel. I felt hope.
The days after the HOA meeting felt strangely calm, almost like the quiet after a long storm. For years, Karen had walked around with pride, acting untouchable, but now the neighborhood watched her with new eyes. She wasn't the queen anymore. She was simply a woman who had misused her power, and people finally saw through her sharp tongue and fake smiles. But even though her authority was frozen, I knew she wouldn't give up that easily. People who thrive on control never surrender without a fight, and I was right. She tried everything to regain her power, But this time, the neighborhood was watching her like a hawk. The HOA board began their investigation quietly but firmly. They reviewed her financial records. They checked the decisions she had made. They looked into the fines she issued and the rules she twisted. Every day, someone from the board stopped by to ask a few more questions. Sometimes they called me. Sometimes they called the neighbors. And slowly, the picture became clear. Karen had been breaking more rules than she ever accused anyone else of breaking. She used HOA funds for her personal garden. She approved penalties without proper procedure. She ignored maintenance requests. And worst of all, she targeted people she thought were too weak to fight back. As the investigation moved forward, her behavior became unpredictable. Some days, she stayed inside her house with the blinds shut tight, pacing back and forth like a trapped cat. Other days, she walked around angrily, mumbling to herself, snapping at anyone who looked her way. It was clear she was losing control, and when people like her lose control, they often lash out in desperation. One evening, as the sun was setting and my son and I were watering the flowers in our yard, Karen stormed across the street toward us. Her face was red, her breaths fast, and her hands shaking with anger. She pointed at me and shouted, "You think you can turn this neighborhood against me? You think you can steal my position? This is my community and you don't belong here." Her voice was loud enough that several neighbors opened their doors to watch. Some stood on the sidewalk. Others peeked from their porches. But no one came to defend her. Not anymore. My son took a step behind me, clutching my clothes. I bent down, placed a calm hand on his back, and whispered, "It's okay. I'm right here." Then I stood up straight and looked Karen in the eyes. I didn't shout back. I didn't insult her. I simply said, "You did this to yourself. You hurt people. You mocked my child, and now you're facing the truth." Her eyes widened in disbelief, as if she had never expected anyone to speak to her with such calm strength. But the truth was no longer a whisper. It was standing right in front of her. She took another step forward, but before she could speak again, Mr. Collins appeared with his cane, walking slowly but purposefully. He stood between us and said in his steady old voice, "Karen, go home. Your time of bullying people is over." His words were simple, but they carried decades of wisdom. Other neighbors gathered around him, forming a wall of quiet strength. That was the moment Karen realized she had lost the community entirely. She wasn't feared anymore. She wasn't respected anymore. She was alone. She turned around and walked away, her steps heavy, her pride wounded. And as she walked, the neighborhood watched her with the same silence they once used to avoid her. Except this time, it wasn't fear. It was relief. The next morning, the HOA board called an emergency meeting. This time, they didn't ask everyone to attend. They only invited me. When I entered the room, the board members looked serious, papers spread out on the table, and a folder thicker than the one I had given them. They asked me to sit. One of the older board members, Mrs. Reynolds, looked at me with tired but kind eyes and said, "We found enough evidence to take serious action, but we want to ask you something first." My heart tightened a little. "Ask me what?" She leaned forward and said, "Do you want to file a formal case against Karen for harassment, discrimination, and misuse of power?" The room was silent, the air heavy. My hands trembled slightly as I thought about everything my son had gone through. His tears, his confusion, his small voice asking if he was doing something wrong. Every memory hit me at once. But I also remembered something else, his innocence, his gentle smile, his hope. I took a deep breath and said, "Yes, I want to file the case. Not for revenge, but to protect other families from her." The board nodded. They understood. They had lived long enough to know the difference between revenge and justice. Once the decision was officially filed, everything moved quickly. The HOA lawyer contacted her. She tried to argue. She tried to deny everything. She even tried to blame the entire neighborhood. But when she realized that every witness, every document, every statement was against her, her confidence began to crumble like old bricks. Over the next few weeks, she received multiple notices, official warnings, legal letters, and then the final one arrived. An order from the HOA requiring her to vacate her position, pay penalties, and prepare for legal proceedings. When she received it, she stood in her driveway for nearly 10 minutes, staring at the paper with shaking hands. For the first time, she looked small, like someone who had never imagined facing consequences. A few days later, a moving truck pulled up in front of her house. She stood on the porch, with her arms crossed, her eyes full of anger, but her shoulders heavy with defeat. People watched from their windows quietly, not to mock her, not to celebrate, but because they had lived long enough to understand that life always catches up to a person, good or bad. And as she carried her last box to the truck, she looked across the street at us. My son was drawing chalk hearts on the sidewalk. He looked up, smiled, and waved, not because he forgave her, but because his heart was too pure to carry hate. That simple gesture made her turn away quickly, almost like she couldn't face the innocence she had tried to destroy. She got in the truck, slammed the door, and drove off. And just like that, the neighborhood exhaled. A long, tired exhale that had been held in for years. Neighbors came outside slowly, one by one, some leaning on walking sticks, some holding warm cups of tea. They gathered around us, thanking us quietly, patting my hand, touching my shoulder. One old woman hugged my son tightly and whispered, "You're a brave little boy. Don't ever stop walking." And for the first time in a long time, I felt peace settling into the neighborhood like a soft evening breeze.
After Karen left, the neighborhood felt lighter, almost as if a heavy shadow had finally moved away from our lives. For the first time in many years, people began talking freely again. Older couples walked outside without worrying about being judged. Neighbors waved from their porches with real smiles, not the forced ones they used before. Even the birds seemed louder in the morning, singing in a way that reminded everyone that peace had returned. But while the community was healing, my son was still learning how to feel safe again. Even though he smiled and played, I could see moments when he hesitated before going outside, as if some part of him still remembered the cruel words Karen had thrown at him. It's strange how deeply a child's heart can be hurt by something they didn't understand. But it's even more amazing how gently that same heart heals when surrounded by love. One afternoon, as we sat in the backyard watching the sunset, my son asked, "Dad, is she gone forever?" His little voice trembled just a bit, not out of fear, but out of uncertainty. I wrapped my arm around him and pulled him close. "Yes, buddy," I said softly. "She can't hurt you anymore. And no one will ever let something like that happen again." He leaned his head on my shoulder, and that moment reminded me that justice isn't just about punishment. It's about giving people their peace back. The HOA board, now free from Karen's control, worked hard to rebuild trust. They invited every homeowner, even the elderly ones who rarely left their houses, to an open meeting. It was held in the community hall, and for the first time, people actually wanted to be there. Chairs filled up quickly. Some brought walking sticks, others arrived in wheelchairs, but they all came because they finally felt heard. Mrs. Reynolds opened the meeting with a trembling voice, but it was filled with honesty. She admitted they had failed the community by letting one person hold too much power. She apologized for not stepping in sooner, especially after seeing how Karen treated my son. Many people wiped their eyes, not because the words were dramatic, but because they were true. And truth has a way of touching the heart more deeply than anything else. The board then asked me to share my thoughts. I stood slowly, knowing that many of the people looking at me had lived longer, seen more pain, and faced more challenges than I ever had. So I spoke with respect, I told them how grateful I was for their support, how proud I was of the courage each neighbor showed by speaking up, and how important it was that what happened to my son never happened again. Not in this community, not anywhere else. When I finished, something beautiful happened. The entire room began to clap. Not loudly, not wildly, but softly, gently, with the kind of warmth only older hearts can give. It wasn't applause for me, it was applause for a neighborhood that had finally stood together. As the meeting went on, people shared their stories, some painful, some uplifting. It was like opening windows in a room that had been closed for too long. Fresh air filled the space, and for the first time, it felt like a real community. Not just houses lined up on a street. To make sure no one ever abused power again, the HOA created new rules. Clear rules, fair rules, rules that protected families, elderly residents, and especially children with disabilities. They added new complaint systems, set limits on authority, and introduced regular audits. It was their way of saying, "We learned our lesson." A few weeks passed, and slowly, my son's confidence returned. He began walking with his little walker again, exploring the sidewalk, waving at neighbors. They always waved back. Some even brought him small gifts, coloring books, flowers, tiny wooden toys they made by hand. It was their way of apologizing, their way of giving him kindness to replace every cruel word he had heard. One day, as he walked with me to the mailbox, he stopped suddenly and looked up. "Dad, people are nicer now." His innocent smile warmed my heart. "Yes," I said, "because people remembered who they really are." He nodded and kept walking, taking slow but proud steps. Each step was a victory. Each step was healing. Each step was proof that even the smallest person can inspire the biggest change. But life has a way of surprising us even when things seem peaceful. About a month after Karen left, I received a letter in the mail. It had no return address. Inside was a short note written in shaky handwriting. It read, "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said what I said. I was wrong. I hope your son grows strong. K." I stared at the paper for a long time. The words were small, imperfect, almost painful to read, but they were real. And for someone like Karen, writing them must have taken everything she had left. I didn't know if she meant it. I didn't know if she had changed. But what I did know was that the world becomes a little more peaceful every time someone chooses remorse over pride. I folded the note and placed it in a small box where I keep important memories. Not because I wanted to remember her cruelty, but because I wanted to remember that people can change, even the ones who seem the hardest to reach. Days turned into weeks, weeks turned into a peaceful routine, and slowly, our home became a place of joy again. Not perfect, not flawless, but filled with love, kindness, and the type of quiet strength that older generations always say is the backbone of a good life. But I knew one thing. This story wasn't finished yet. Justice had been served, healing had begun, and the neighborhood had changed. But something even bigger was coming, something I didn't expect, something that would change our lives once more, in a way that none of us saw coming.
Life has a gentle way of moving forward after pain, almost like a river that continues its journey even after crashing against rocks. Our neighborhood was healing, and so was my son. Every morning he walked outside with a little more confidence, a little more joy. The elderly neighbors greeted him warmly, calling his name, waving, smiling in that soft, comforting way older people have. For the first time in a long while, I felt peace settling into every corner of our home. But something unexpected happened. Something that reminded all of us that kindness can echo far beyond the moment it is given. One quiet afternoon, as my son and I were drawing chalk shapes on the driveway, a small white car stopped in front of our house. I thought it was a delivery, but then the door opened and a familiar figure stepped out. It was Karen. But she didn't walk with her usual pride. Her shoulders were hunched, her steps small, her eyes tired. She looked older than before, as if life had finally caught up to her. The neighborhood noticed her arrival, and people peeked out of their windows, unsure of why she had returned. My son froze for a moment, his little hand tightening around the chalk. I gently put my hand on his back. "It's okay," I whispered. "I'm here." Karen walked slowly toward us, stopping a few feet away. For a moment, she simply stood there, her eyes shifting between me and my son. There was no arrogance, no anger, no cruelty, only regret. She cleared her throat, and her voice trembled in a way I never imagined. I came to apologize. In person. The words hung in the air, heavy and unexpected. I didn't respond. I wanted her to continue. She looked at my son, her eyes softening. She said quietly, "I hurt you. I said things I shouldn't have. I don't expect forgiveness, but I needed to say I'm sorry." My son looked up at me, unsure how to react. Children don't understand complicated emotions like resentment or pride. They understand kindness and hurt. They understand sincerity. And in her voice, even I could hear a rare sincerity, something she had never shown before. I nodded slowly. "Thank you for saying that," I replied, keeping my voice calm. "It doesn't erase what happened, but it matters." She lowered her head. "I know. I've been going through a lot, but that doesn't excuse anything." Her voice broke slightly. "I was wrong. I hope your son grows strong. I hope he finds happiness." My son, with the pure heart only children have, stepped a little closer. He didn't speak. He didn't blame. He simply nodded once. That small gesture made her eyes well with tears. She wiped them quickly and whispered, "Goodbye," before walking back to her car. She drove away slowly, and this time no one came outside to wash. No one whispered. No one judged, because they all understood something powerful. Life has a way of humbling every one of us, and some lessons come late, but they come. After she left, I lifted my son into my arms. He rested his head on my shoulder and said softly, "Dad, I think she's sad." I nodded gently. "Maybe she is. But sometimes people become better after sadness." He smiled, a small smile filled with innocence and wisdom beyond his years. The months that followed were peaceful. The community grew closer, stronger, kinder. Neighbors helped one another. People checked on elderly residents. Children played freely, without fear. And my son, he flourished. He walked more than before, gaining strength day by day, his steps slow but full of courage. One evening, during a warm golden sunset, the whole neighborhood gathered for a small block party organized by the HOA. Tables were decorated with flowers. Elderly neighbors sat in comfortable chairs, sharing stories from decades ago. My son ran. Yes, ran toward the group of kids playing, his laughter echoing softly through the warm air. Everyone clapped, smiled, cheered. Mrs. Thompson even wiped a tear from her eye. In that moment, I realized something important. This wasn't just a story about facing cruelty. It wasn't only about standing up for my son. It was about the power of community, the power of truth, the power of love, and the unbelievable strength that even the smallest child can bring into a world filled with both shadows and light. Karen's cruelty had almost broken us, but it also brought out the courage in our neighborhood. And in the end, kindness won, Justice won. And my son, he won the biggest victory of them all. He found safety, belonging, and hope. As the stars began to shine, I looked around at the smiling faces, the gentle gestures, the warm voices, and I understood one thing clearly. Sometimes life tests us so that we can become the strength someone else needs.